Hello everybody, and welcome to a PTR preview for the new map, Infernal Shrines, for Heroes of the Storm on the PTR. Here's the thing, this map is a lot like Battlefield of Eternity, except it isn't. It shares the same tile set, so it looks a lot of, the same that you would normally see in Battlefield of Eternity, except it's got a completely different mechanic, and I would argue it feels the most Diablo of everything that they've added thus far for Eternal Conflict. It's a 3-lane map, unlike the 2-lane map that the Battlefield of Eternity is, and it feels a bit bigger. I would say scale-wise it's about the same, but it feels bigger mostly because you don't have that big empty spot in the middle. Also, the 3 shrines on this map are the objectives. So you have one in the top, one in the middle, and one in the bottom. You also have 2 bruiser camps on the top, and then the 3 siege camps on the bottom. So pretty typical for a rather large map, but there's no boss camp. And that's because the shrines that you fight over is basically the boss. They happen fairly frequently, and from what I can tell with my small limited amount of testing, is they spawn randomly per game, so you're not necessarily going to get the same shrine spawning over and over, the top, then the bottom, then the middle, like every time. It feels fairly randomized, which I like quite a bit. Now, the thing with the shrines is that when you're controlling a shrine, it spawns enemies, and you have to kill 30 enemies in order to get a Punisher to spawn. But the other team's going to try to stop you, so it leads into this really cool, team fight scenario. Imagine the temples from Sky Temple mixed with, the dynamic of Battlefield of Eternity, where you're constantly fighting each other over these objectives, and you're not backing off, disengaging, and maybe going to a different objective, because only one of these temples spawn at a time, so you really want to be there to kill this stuff. Now, the things that are spawning that you have to kill, they don't necessarily do a lot of damage to you, so they're not a huge threat, which means the incoming enemy is really what you need to worry about, and less about, the actual shrine itself. It's important to note that you can activate the shrine instead of waiting for it to activate on its own. Like on Sky Temple, there's a countdown, and then the shrine activates, and then you can capture it. In this, there's a countdown, but then you can go activate the actual event of spawning the creatures. It doesn't just start spawning them right away, which I like, and I think it's important to have that, because it just makes it so that you don't show up and there's 100 enemies just sitting there waiting for you to kill. Now, as the shrines themselves aren't necessarily that difficult to do and aren't that dangerous, the one danger that you need to watch out for are the Punishers. Now, the Punishers come in 3 varieties. They have one that spawns arcane beams, one that spawns frozen orbs, and one that spawns, doesn't spawn, but shoots mortar. And if you play Diablo 3, you know exactly what I'm talking about with those. They're all really deadly. The arcane beams in particular, I would say, are my favorite, because as someone who's died to that 100,000 times in Diablo, I find great justice in playing Johanna and using Condemn and sucking everybody into it, having them take a ton of damage. The Punishers themselves also will target heroes. In fact, they prefer usually to target heroes if they're nearby, so you got to be careful, because no other boss does that in the game. They'll push buildings, and they do a good job of it. They soak up the, tower shots and everything, but they will jump on you and kill you if you're nearby. So if you're defending, you don't necessarily want to engage in a huge team fight, because chances of you dying to the Immortal are likely. Arcane beams, as I mentioned, are a really dangerous thing, and if you're playing Johanna or people who can control the battlefield, you can really set people up for death. You can either get them stuck in the frozen, which will constantly stun them, or you can, maybe get them in the mortar hits, or maybe zombie wall them in the arcane beams. It's pretty nasty. One really good thing about this map, though, is that the flow is just right. It just feels right, and flow is an important part of the game, whether you're playing it or spectating it, if you're watching esports with it. Flow really matters more than I think a lot of people realize. Now, I think this is why you see a lot of Sky Temple, because Sky Temple has this flow where it's one thing after another. You get the objective to spawn, and then you're like, okay, we lost that objective, it's time to catch up. Let's go get mercenary camps, or let's go back into the lane and start collecting experience. And then you're doing that for just a little bit of amount of time before, 2 minutes in particular on a Sky Temple before another temple shows up. And for this, you get shrines fairly regularly. So it feels like everything just keeps moving. And I think is why you see a lot of Sky Temple in the pro scene at the moment when they pick that map, because it ultimately ends, right? It's got a good flow to it, but you ultimately end the map by playing the objective. Unlike the current iteration, although it's about to be fixed, of Tomb of the Spider Queen, where those games can drag on quite a bit because the spiders don't necessarily do a ton of stuff, right? They're good, but they're not super strong. So eventually the game will end with Sky Temple, as long as people are getting temples, which they will be. And with games like Tomb of the Spider Queen, it can drag on a bit. This has got like that perfect sweet spot where the game constantly feels like there's action going on. There's always stuff for you to do, and then the objective spawn. And then you have to do the objective, and then you're pushing with the objective or you're defending it, and then it's got a good flow, right? And like I said, I think that is really good about this map, but I think of all things that they've added an internal conflict, and I know that this is something that I'll preach pretty much until Eternal Conflict is over, is most of the stuff they added hasn't felt very Diablo-esque. Johanna is a Crusader, and yeah, she feels a little bit like the Crusader. Sure, she has the abilities. Butcher, I mean, he feels okay. It's hard to say like he feels like the Butcher because you don't really play as the Butcher in Diablo, so it's hard to get the feeling of what that would be like. And same goes for Leoric. However, with the monk, it definitely does have that monk flavor to it, kind of like Johanna does. And Karazim, he's got just enough to be like, okay, this feels like I'm playing a Diablo character. But with this map in particular, this feels like Diablo, between the arcane beams and the frozen and the mortar, and just the general flow of it. It just feels very Diablo, and I really, really like that. I think the Cursed Shrines was a really good idea for an objective, and I can't wait to see how it plays out in the pro scene. Also, I can't wait to see how my games play out, because I've had some pretty close games before, and I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of games won and lost with that very last shrine that you end up getting in the game, or don't end up getting. Maybe you go in too soon, maybe you don't go in at all, and you let them take it, but you manage to kill the Immortal or the Punisher before it wrecks your base, and then you get a really good team fight, and then you win the game. Like, I think it's just going to have a really fun dynamic, this map, and I honestly have a feeling that this map is going to be a favorite among people. I'm certainly enjoying it with the little that I've played of it, of course, but it's been really fun. I like it more than Battlefield of Eternity, and I think that says a lot about the map in particular. But with that being said, I'm hopefully going to try to check out the monk a bit. I'm a little hesitant about that, doing a video on it, because it is PTR and it can change, obviously. And secondly, I hate making calls on like, okay, this ability seems good and this ability seems bad, because chances are it's going to change everything when the meta changes at the end game, for the top ranked players anyway. So I don't know about that. Maybe I'll do a video of it. Either way, you should definitely be excited for this map, because it is going to make the game have a lot more freshness in it than it already currently does. But with that being said, we shall see you guys next time.